Rita thought no one noticed her slipping out of the mansion early again, but someone did. From the tinted window of his silent black sedan, Ronald Kang, one of the most feared mafia bosses in South Korea, watched his blonde maid hurry down the street with her shoulders tense and her hands trembling. She didn't wait for a cab. She didn't call anyone. She moved fast, almost like she was running from something. Ronald had seen these signs before. In his world, strange behavior meant danger. So that night, for the first time in years, he chose to follow someone himself. Block after block, the city lights faded into broken alleys and crumbling buildings. Rita slipped into a decaying apartment complex that looked like a place no one should live. Ronald followed her inside. What he found behind that thin, cracked door hit him harder than any bullet ever had. No betrayal, no secret lover, no hidden criminal ties. Just a tiny, freezing room. And a little boy, her son, lying on a thin mattress, coughing so violently it echoed through the hallway. Rita knelt beside him, feeding him leftovers she had hidden from the mansion, whispering, "Mommy's trying, I promise." What Ronald saw next left him in tears. But before I continue, please take a moment to subscribe. My husband said I can't reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove him wrong. Thanks for subscribing. Ronald Kang wasn't always a man who noticed small details about his maids. People whispered about him. People feared him. And tonight, his past was coming back in ways he never expected. He sat frozen in the shadows outside that cracked door, watching Rita cradle her sick child. The boy's chest heaved with every breath. His skin looked pale under the dim light of a single bulb. Rita opened plastic containers, leftovers from Ronald's mansion kitchen, food she had smuggled out in her bag. "Just a little more, baby," she whispered. "You need to eat." The boy tried. He took 3 bites, then his body convulsed with another violent cough. Ronald's hands tightened into fists. He recognized that cough. It wasn't just a cold. It was something serious, something that required medicine Rita clearly couldn't afford. She wiped the boy's forehead with a damp cloth, singing softly in broken Korean, a lullaby she must have learned from someone she loved. And that's when Ronald saw it. On the broken shelf beside the mattress, half-empty medicine bottles, expired prescriptions. A hospital bill with a red stamp that read "Final Notice." Rita wasn't stealing food because she was greedy. She was stealing food because her son was dying. Ronald stumbled back into the hallway, his breath shallow. For 20 years, he had trained himself to feel nothing. Emotion was weakness. Weakness was death. But standing in that decaying building, watching a mother fight a battle she couldn't win, something inside him shattered. He didn't know her story yet. He didn't know why she was alone. He didn't know how she ended up in this nightmare, but he knew one thing. He had been wrong about her. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. Ronald left the building without a sound. He sat in his car for 30 minutes, staring at nothing. His hands were shaking. Ronald Kang, a man who had killed without hesitation, who had destroyed rival gangs without mercy, was shaking. Because tonight, for the first time in decades, he felt something he thought he'd buried forever. Shame. The next morning, Rita arrived at the mansion exactly on time. Her hair was tied back neatly, her uniform was pressed. Her smile was soft and professional. But Ronald saw what he had never seen before. The dark circles under her eyes. The way her hands trembled when she poured his coffee. The exhaustion carved into every movement. She had been breaking in front of him for weeks, and he had been too blind to notice. "Rita," he said quietly. She froze. Her eyes widened with fear. In her world, when a boss called your name like that, it meant trouble. "Yes, Mr. Kang." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "Sit down." I'm working, sir. I should sit down." She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair across from him. Her fingers twisted together in her lap. Ronald studied her face. He had interrogated countless men. He knew how to read fear, guilt, deception, but what he saw in Rita wasn't any of those things. It was exhaustion, desperation, and something deeper, something that looked like resignation. "How long have you been taking care of your son alone?" Ronald asked. The question hit her like a gunshot. Her face crumbled. Her eyes filled with tears she tried desperately to hold back. Her voice broke. How did you? I followed you last night. Rita's breath stopped. Her entire body went rigid. She thought she was about to be fired. She thought her son's last lifeline was about to be cut. But Ronald's next words changed everything. Tell me what happened. And so Rita told him. She told him about Minjai, the photographer she loved, the man who promised her forever, the father who never got to meet his son. She told him about the aneurysm that killed him on a rainy Wednesday night. She told him about discovering she was pregnant 2 weeks after burying him. She told him about the bills, the evictions, the 3 jobs, the sleepless nights. She told him about Yunwoo's diagnosis, severe chronic asthma with respiratory complications. She told him about the hospital bills she couldn't pay, the medicine she couldn't afford, the specialist appointments she had to skip. She told him about stealing food from his kitchen because some nights it was the only way her son ate. She told him everything. And when she finished, she looked up at Ronald with tears streaming down her face and whispered, I'm sorry, I'll pay you back. I'll work for free. Just please don't fire me. Ronald didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said 4 words that would change both their lives forever. You're moving in here. Rita stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. What? You and your son. You're moving into the mansion. Mr. Kang, I can't accept. I'm not asking. His voice was firm, but not cruel. I'm telling you, pack your things, bring your son. You'll have your own room. He'll have his own room, and he'll see the best doctors in Seoul. Rita's hands covered her mouth. Her entire body shook with sobs she could no longer control. Why, she whispered. Why would you do this? Ronald looked away, his jaw tight. Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love die when you're powerless to stop it. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. Rita understood. Beneath the tailored suits, the cold eyes, the empire of fear, Ronald Kang was just a man who had lost too much. And maybe, just maybe, saving her son would help him save the part of himself he thought was gone forever. 2 days later, Rita and Yunwoo moved into Ronald's mansion. The staff didn't understand. The security team whispered. Even Ronald's closest advisors questioned his decision. But Ronald didn't care. He set up a private medical suite for Yunwoo. He hired the best pediatric respiratory specialist in the country. He made sure the boy had everything he needed: medicine, treatments, a comfortable bed, clean air. For the first time in 4 years, Yunwoo slept through the night without coughing. For the first time in 4 years, Rita didn't wake up in panic, wondering if her son would survive until morning. And for the first time in 20 years, Ronald felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose. But not everyone was happy about Ronald's decision. In the shadows of Seoul's underworld, whispers began to spread. Ronald Kang, the cold, untouchable mafia boss, had gone soft. He had taken in a woman and a child. He had shown mercy. And in their world, mercy was the same as weakness. 3 weeks after Rita moved in, Ronald received a message that made his blood run cold. It was delivered by one of his own men, a young enforcer named Jiho. Boss, Jiho said, his voice tight with fear. There's a problem. What kind of problem? It's about the woman and the kid. Ronald's eyes darkened. Speak. Some of the lower-level guys. They think you're distracted. They think you've lost your edge. And words spreading to rival syndicates. Ronald stood slowly, his presence filling the room like a storm about to break. Let me be very clear, he said, his voice low and lethal. If anyone touches that woman or her son, I will burn their entire organization to the ground. I will hunt them. I will destroy their families. I will erase them from existence. Do you understand? Jiho nodded quickly. Yes, boss. Good. Now get out. But as Jiho left, Ronald knew the truth. Threats wouldn't be enough. Because in his world, showing weakness invited death. And the people closest to him were always the first targets. That night, Ronald couldn't sleep. He walked the halls of his mansion, past rooms filled with treasures that meant nothing. He stopped outside Yunwoo's door. The boy was asleep, his breathing steady for the first time in years. Rita sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his chest. rising and falling with each breath. She looked up when she saw Ronald in the doorway. "He's getting better," she whispered. "The doctors said his lungs are responding to treatment." Ronald nodded. He should have felt relief, but all he felt was dread, because he knew what was coming. His world didn't allow for soft things. It didn't allow for love, hope, or second chances. It only allowed for power, and power demanded sacrifice. The attack came 3 nights later. Ronald was in a meeting with his top lieutenants when the security alarm screamed through the mansion. "Breach at the east gate," one of his guards shouted through the radio. Ronald's heart stopped. The east gate was closest to the guest wing, where Rita and Yunwoo were sleeping. He moved faster than he had in years, pulling his gun from the hidden drawer in his desk. His men followed, but Ronald was already halfway down the hall. He kicked open the door to Rita's room. She was standing in front of Yunwoo's bed, shielding him with her body, her face white with terror. 3 armed men stood in the doorway, hired guns, not from his organization. One of them raised his weapon. Ronald didn't hesitate. 3 shots, 3 bodies. The silence that followed was deafening. Rita collapsed to her knees, pulling Yunwoo into her arms. The boy was crying, but he was alive. Ronald stood over the bodies, his gun still raised, his breath coming in sharp bursts. "Get them to the safe room," he barked at his men. "Now!" As Rita and Yunwoo were escorted away, Ronald stared down at the dead men. He recognized the tattoos on their wrists. They were from the Bag Syndicate, a rival organization that had been testing his borders for months. This wasn't just an attack. It was a declaration of war. And they had made one fatal mistake. They had threatened the people Ronald cared about. The next 72 hours were a bloodbath. Ronald didn't just retaliate, he annihilated. He called in every favor, activated every sleeper cell, unleashed every brutal strategy he had spent years perfecting. The Bayek Syndicate's operations crumbled. Their leaders disappeared, their soldiers scattered. Within 3 days, the organization that had stood for 20 years ceased to exist. Seoul's underworld got the message loud and clear. Ronald Kang had not gone soft. He had become something far more dangerous, a man with something to protect. When Ronald finally returned to the mansion, he was covered in blood that wasn't his. Rita was waiting for him in the main hall, her arms wrapped around herself. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. Ronald nodded. "It's over. Did you kill them?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Rita looked at him for a long moment, and Ronald expected fear, disgust, horror. But instead, she stepped forward and did something that shocked him. She hugged him, not as a maid, not as someone grateful for charity, but as someone who understood. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for protecting him." Ronald stood frozen, his blood-stained hands hovering awkwardly at his sides. He didn't know how to accept kindness. He didn't know how to be held without violence, but slowly, carefully, he lowered his arms and held her back. For the first time in 20 years, Ronald Kang wasn't alone. Months passed. Yunwoo's health improved dramatically. The color returned to his cheeks. His laughter filled the mansion. Rita stopped working as a maid. Ronald insisted she focus on her son and on healing herself. She started taking classes again. English tutoring, translation work, things that gave her purpose beyond survival. And Ronald changed. He didn't leave the underworld. He was too deep for that. But he became more strategic, more selective. He stopped expanding his empire and started protecting what he had. He set up medical funds for his employees' families. He quietly paid off hospital bills for people who worked in his organization. He became known not just as a man to fear, but as a man who protected his own. And slowly, the mansion that once felt like a tomb became something else. A home. One evening, Ronald found Yunwoo in the library, flipping through a photography book. "Do you like cameras?" Ronald asked. The boy looked up, his eyes bright. "My dad was a photographer." Ronald sat down beside him. "Your mom told me. He sounded like a good man." Yunwoo nodded. "Mom says he would have loved me." "He would have." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Yunwoo looked up at Ronald and asked the question that had been weighing on both their minds. "Are you going to be my new dad?" Ronald's breath caught. He looked at this small, fragile boy, the boy he had saved, the boy who had saved him, and realized the truth. He didn't have an answer, but he wanted one. That night, Ronald found Rita on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. He asked me if I was going to be his father, Ronald said quietly. Rita turned, her expression unreadable. What did you say? I didn't know how to answer. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. Do you want to be? Ronald had killed men for asking less dangerous questions. But standing here, under the stars, with this woman who had cracked open his heart, he found the courage to tell the truth. Yes, Rita's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of hope. Then be his father, she whispered. Be the man I know you can be. And for the first time in his life, Ronald Kang made a promise not born of violence or power, but of love. 1 year later, Ronald and Rita stood in a small chapel. No grand wedding, no press, no spectacle. Just them, Yunwoo, and a handful of people who mattered. When the officiant asked if Ronald would protect, honor, and cherish Rita for the rest of his life, he didn't hesitate. I will. And when Rita was asked the same, she smiled through tears and said, I already do. Yunwoo stood between them, holding both their hands. He wasn't coughing anymore. He wasn't pale. He wasn't scared. He was just a boy, standing between two people who loved him. And for the first time since his father died, he felt safe. Ronald Kang never stopped being a mafia boss. But he stopped being just a mafia boss. He became a husband, a father, a man who understood that true strength wasn't found in fear, but in the courage to care. He had built an empire on violence, but he built a family on love. And in the end, it was the family that saved him. Years later, when Yunwoo was a teenager, he asked Ronald a question. Dad, why did you save us? Ronald thought for a long moment. Then he answered with the truth. Because your mother reminded me that I was still human, and you reminded me what I was fighting for. Yunwoo smiled. I'm glad you followed her that night. Ronald smiled back, something he did often now. So am I, son, so am I. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe. My husband challenged me that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove him wrong. Thanks for subscribing.